to the talk as best you can, and this stuff will start to come together in various ways.
Yeah, as Jordan said, if you don't really understand something, don't worry about it. You will later. I used to listen to Bhante's talks in my car, and for the first, number of talks, I didn't know what he was talking about. But as you meditate, you listen to it more, you'll understand what's going on. And when you really understand it, you'll be in Arahat. So until then, don't worry. All right, so we're going to talk more about dependent origination. I have my dependent origination shirt on from the LA symposium we had made up. It has all the links of dependent origination. The front green ones are kind of the ones we talked about last night, some of them, and that is contact, feeling, contact and feeling. Want to talk about anything else? Yeah, basically just these two. Contact and feeling. But don't worry, it's not. The rest are twice as long. No. So the rest of them have to do with the craving that follows feeling. I want, I don't want. Those links. And then there are links before the contact. These are the potentials. This is the data. This is, we were just talking about it. This is the matrix. When you see the movie The Matrix, you see all the things. These are the things that are coming down. These are the things that you can't see from your consciousness now, but you can experience them once you attain Nibbana and you come out of that state. You will see them. You'll see representations of them. Your mind will represent them in some sort of way, whether it's bubbles, lines. Some actually see the wheels of samsara, the links going around and around. Whatever way it is, you'll actually see them. But when you think you see some of these things, you probably aren't. You're seeing the up higher. You're seeing maybe craving, feeling. Anyway, let's get into this. From the Samyutta Nikaya 12.1, monks, I will teach you dependent origination. Listen to that and attend closely, I will speak. Yes, Venerable Sir, those monks replied. The Blessed One said this, and what, monks, is dependent origination? With ignorance as condition, formations come to be. With formations as condition, consciousness. With consciousness as condition, name and form. With name and form as condition, the six sense bases. With the six sense bases as condition, contact. With contact as condition, feeling. With feeling as condition, craving. With craving as condition, clinging. With clinging as condition, habitual tendencies. With habitual tendencies as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. This, monks, is called dependent origination. And, continues. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of formations. With the cessation of formations, cessation of consciousness. With cessation of consciousness, cessation of name and form, or nama rupa. With the cessation of name and form, cessation of the six sense bases. With the cessation of the six sense bases, cessation of contact. With the cessation of contact, cessation of feeling. With the cessation of feeling, cessation of craving. With the cessation of craving, cessation of clinging. with the cessation of clinging, cessation of habitual tendencies, with the cessation of habitual tendencies, cessation of birth, with the cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. The highest goal of tranquil wisdom insight meditation is to see how each link is dependent on or conditioned by the previous link. When one understands this process in a deep and profound way, the unconditioned state, nibbana, arises for the first time. This first instance is the path knowledge. One realizes that there is no personal self or ego, just an impersonal process of dependent origination. From this realization comes tremendous relief, because as the famous Zen saying goes, no self, no problem. No one is there, so nobody to control. It's as if we see a dark figure walking towards us. Fear might arise because our mind throws up this concept of a villain from our past. Yet when we get closer, we see it as our friend, and that fearful image is replaced by another happy image. Just in the same way, we thought there was a self there, and now we see that that was an illusion. So that's the Buddha's definition of dependent origination. It's pretty straightforward. He just names the links. Each link is dependent on the link before it. This is the important part of this. It's conditioned dependence. If there's a feeling arise, if you see some ice cream, you want that ice cream, and you go get it, and then you eat it, and then it's gone, and then suffering comes, and then you repeat the process again. If you didn't see something, you wouldn't have had any of those thoughts. It wouldn't have happened. So when you 6R something, when you 6R a craving that arises in your mind, then the clinging, the thoughts, let's say you 6R restlessness, then the restlessness is a feeling. Then it doesn't lead to, oh, I'm so restless, I don't know if I can sit any longer. And then, oh, you know what, I just can't do this. And then that leads to birth of action, and you get up and you go outside and you quit your sitting. But if you could 6R at the feeling, then none of these other links would arise. From the Nidana Samyutta, called causation, 12.6. It is wonderful, Venerable Sir. It is amazing, Venerable Sir. This dependent origination is so deep and so deep in implications. Yet to me, it seems as clear can be. Not so, Ananda. Not so, Ananda. This is the Buddha scolding Ananda. This dependent origination is deep, and deep in implications. It is because of not understanding and not penetrating this Dhamma, Ananda, that this generation has become like a tangled skein, like a knotted ball of thread, like matted reeds and rushes, and does not pass beyond the plane of misery, the bad destinations, the netherworld, samsara. Ananda, when one dwells contemplating gratification in things that can be clung to, craving increases. With craving as condition, clinging comes to be, and so on. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. Now, what happened was Ananda just attained Sotapanna. He heard a phrase, and he had a cessation in his mind, and the path of Sotapanna arose. Actually, it's the fruit of Sotapanna arose here. And he just saw dependent origination. He saw how everything is conditioned by something before it. And it was so clear, he said, oh, it's amazing. Dependent origination is so deep, and yet to me it seems as clear can be. But the Buddha said, no. It takes a little while to understand it. When you understand it, though, you'll understand how we operate, what our mental process is, how we see the world, how everything happens, what makes up the world. As the Buddha has stated, this is from Venerable Nyanananda from Concept and Reality. As the Buddha has stated, the world is not prepared to accept the law of dependent arising, dependent origination. They turn a blind eye to its most aspect of cessation, or nirodha. They keep on jumping from arising to arising, ignoring the cessation aspect. That is why it is said that worldlings are always on the samudaya, the arising side. The Aryans see the nirodha. For them, it is the truth and bliss. So what he's saying is that we're always looking for the next arising, and the arhat is looking at how everything ceases and experiences relief. Because it ends, now there's relief. But because of craving, we're always on the arising aspect. This is a really deep type of realization if you can kind of get your minds around it. Okay. Now this sutta is number 12.10 of the Nidana Samyutta. The Nidana Samyutta, so the Samyutta Nikaya is short discourses, and the Nidana Samyutta is the section on dependent origination. It's about like that big. Every sutta in here is a sutta on dependent origination. There's a lot of them. And he explains it in every kind of different way. Now, here, this sutta here is where the Buddha talks about how he figured out dependent origination before he was enlightened, before he saw it. He reasoned it out. He said, well, if I hear something, then I think about it, etc. So let's listen to this. Origination. Bhikkhus, before my enlightenment, while I was still a bodhisattva, not yet fully enlightened, it occurred to me, alas, this world has fallen into trouble, in that it is born, ages, and dies. It passes away and is reborn. Yet it does not understand the escape from this suffering, headed by aging and death. When now will an escape be discerned from this suffering, headed by aging and death? Then, bhikkhus, it occurred to me, when what exists does aging and death come to be? So there is suffering. So what is the cause of suffering? By what is aging and death conditioned? Then, bhikkhus, through careful attention, there took place in me a breakthrough by wisdom. When there is birth, aging and death come to be. Aging and death has birth as its condition. Unless we're born, we can't. If we're not born, we don't suffer. There's no suffering. But also in the sense that if a mental state, a disturbing mental state arises, if it isn't born, then it doesn't appear and cause suffering. Like if there is no birth of a depressive state, then there is no feeling of that state. If we 6R something before it is, when it is born, then it stops right there and it doesn't go into suffering. Aging, which is the arising and passing away. The passing away is death. Then, bhikkhus, it occurred to me, when there is birth, aging and death comes to be. Aging and death has birth as its condition. Then, bhikkhus, it occurred to me, when what exists does birth come to be? By what is birth conditioned? Then, bhikkhus, through careful attention, there took place in me a breakthrough by wisdom. When there is habitual tendencies, birth comes to be. Birth has existence, or habitual tendencies, or being, or becoming as its condition. So you have a chart. Take a look at your chart. You want to look at the side where it says the 12 links of dependent origination. Now there's another 11 links which we'll talk about later. The 11 links is how once you understand that there's suffering, you understand that there is a path that leads out of suffering, and that's what all of you are on. You are here because there was suffering, and now you're motivated to come and get out of that suffering. But let's see how suffering is created. So on the far right is number 12, Marana. Aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. So that's the outcome. And then we have birth, which is jati. There's birth of action. This is the birth of action. So there are 3 kinds of action: mental, bodily, and verbal action. And this is actions by the mouth, actions by the mind, and actions by the body. So we're talking about habitual tendencies, or bhava here. This is a personal library of your habitual reactions. Each person has a personal library of their most used reactions to situations. So we're not going to explain it all right now, but let's just go through this. Then, bhikkhus, it occurred to me, when what exists does habitual tendencies come to be? By what is habitual tendencies conditioned? Then, bhikkhus, through careful attention, there took place in me a breakthrough by wisdom. When there is clinging, existence comes to be. Existence, or habitual tendencies, has clinging as its condition. So what's clinging? Clinging is thinking. It's thinking and pondering. It's the story that you get. It's the story that runs in our mind about why I like it or I don't like it, whatever arises. This includes all of the thoughts, opinions, ideas, concepts, and imagination that pop up. There are 4 types of clinging. The kamupadana, which is clinging to sensory experience, to sensual delights or things that you don't like. Just sensory experiences that come in through the sense doors. Then there's clinging to views. I like this opinion, you like that opinion. This is my opinion, this is what I am going to cling to. Then there is clinging to rites and rituals. Rites and rituals which you think are going to produce certain results, and then you can get into arguments with people that their rites and rituals don't produce any results, mine do. And so we all have our little rites and rituals in some way. Then there's clinging to self, the view and the belief that there is a personal self. And there's a lot of ways to cling to the idea of self. There's actually 62 ways to think of the self. There is a number of ways to think about yourself in the present. There's thinking about yourself in the past, thinking about yourself in the future. And whenever you think of yourself in the past, it's just a memory. It's just a picture, a memory. But you think you were in the past. And when you think about, I'm going to go on that trip, that's thinking about yourself. You're projecting an image of a self of being somewhere in the future. And when you think about yourself in the present, you think, I'm here, I'm doing this, I'm going to go do that. So this I is constantly present. It's this view of a self that is constantly present. When these are only thoughts, they're just thoughts, and we put this idea of I over it. So this is clinging. Clinging is, thinking, pondering, papancha, like we were talking about last night. Then, bhikkhus, it occurred to me, when what exists does clinging come to be? By what is clinging conditioned? Then, bhikkhus, through careful attention, there took place in me a breakthrough by wisdom. When there is craving, clinging comes to be. Clinging has craving as condition. So what's craving? It's tanha. Craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, craving for non-existence. It manifests as tension and tightness in the mind and in the body. It's the I like it, which is greed, or I don't like it, which is hatred, or basically a neutral kind of I. I am this. It's just taking something as mine. This is my folder. When actually it's just a folder. It's not owned by anybody, but it's my folder. So this I develops and latches onto something. This is the fire that comes up from what? Feeling. Feeling pleasant, painful, neither pleasant nor painful. The sensations, the things that come into your mind from your six sense bases. Then, bhikkhus, it occurred to me, when what exists does craving come to be? By what is craving conditioned? Then, bhikkhus, through careful attention, there took place in me a breakthrough by wisdom. When there is feeling, craving comes to be. Craving has feeling as its condition. So you can't have craving unless there's something to crave for. So when a pleasant feeling is there, craving arises, I want it, I like it. Or something unpleasant, I don't like it. You might have hatred or you might have aversion. But if the object is not there, then the craving doesn't arise. Everything's conditioned on something before it. Then, bhikkhus, it occurred to me, when what exists does feeling come to be? By what is feeling conditioned? Then, bhikkhus, through careful attention, there took place in me a breakthrough by wisdom. When there is contact, feeling comes to be. Feeling has contact as its condition. And so contact means you have the eye, you have the sight, and then consciousness arises. And when consciousness arises, feeling arises. And when feeling arises, you like it or you don't like it. And when you don't like it or like it, then thoughts, a story develops about that. Then that story goes into your normal habitual tendencies arise. For example, you see Starbucks, and you're somebody who likes Pete's, and you go, oh, I'm not a person who likes Starbucks. We'll just go to the next place. So that's being. You are this person. I have my certain things that I am. I am not a Folgers person. I'm definitely a Starbucks person. There are pizza people. Pizza's okay too. It's very good. But, we all have our likes and our dislikes, but these are our tendencies. Whenever we see it, we go, oh, that's me. That's who I am. So where does the birth of action come from? It's from who you think you are. Starbucks is good. Let's stop there. You see it, birth of action, you go in, and it's closed. And then suffering. Then you got to go to peace. Then, bhikkhus, it occurred to me, when what exists do the six sense bases come to be? By what are the six sense bases conditioned? Then, bhikkhus, through careful attention, there took place in me a breakthrough by wisdom. When there is breakthrough by wisdom. When there is, I got ahead of myself. Then, bhikkhus, through careful attention, there took place in me a breakthrough by wisdom. When there are six sense bases, contact comes to be. Contact has the six sense bases as its condition. What are the 6 sense bases? Well, they're the eye, the body, the brain, eye, all of the sense bases, the organs. And without a body, without the sense bases, you couldn't feel. You couldn't have any of these experiences, and you couldn't feel craving, you couldn't feel feeling, and all of these things would not come to be. So that's all based on the 6 sense bases. When there is, by what are the 6 sense bases conditioned? Then bhikkhus, through careful attention, there took place in me, breakthrough by wisdom. When there is name and form, the 6 sense bases comes to be. The 6 sense bases have name and form as their condition. Okay, so we have the 6-fold base, or the 6 sense bases, salayatana, and then we have nama rupa, mentality, materiality, mind and body, or name and form. So the mental part of this is that there is feeling, perception, formations, contact, and attention from the Majjhima Nikaya number 9. It outlines and lists the potential things that are arising. And then the materiality is the 4 elements of earth, wind, fire, and water, not the band. Now, mind and body. So what is mentality and materiality? Well, it's the contents of the mind, and you have to have a body. So you have to have the contents of the mind, and you have to have the elements to make up the body. And the element of earth is hardness. The element of water is cohesion. It puts things, it's sticky, it puts things together. The element of fire is obviously heat and cold. The element of wind is movement. There's movement. And so when you have that, you have body. It creates body. And you have then the contents of your mind, and that's what you really identify with. You identify as who you are as your mind, because your body doesn't know that it's sitting here, but mind does. That's why in the sayings from the Dhammapada, the mind is the forerunner of all evil states. Mind is chief, mind made are they. If one speaks or acts with an unwholesome mind, because of that, suffering follows one, even as the wheel follows the hoof of the draft ox. So it's mind that arises and that you identify with, all of the contents of mind. The body is not the forerunner of mental states, of any states. It is the mind. It appears in mind before it appears in action. Before you do anything, it's in your mind first. And in the same way, wholesome actions. Okay, mentality and materiality, mind and body. So without a mind and body, there's no 6-fold base. There's no contact, feeling, craving, clinging, habitual tendencies, birth, aging, and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. So what creates mentality and materiality? Then, bhikkhus, it occurred to me, when what exists does name and form come to be? By what is name and form conditioned? Then, bhikkhus, through careful attention, there took place in me a breakthrough by wisdom. When there is consciousness, name and form comes to be. Name and form has consciousness as condition. Consciousness. Consciousness is the factor of mind that cognizes, that understands what it sees. It's simply the bare knowledge that is red, that is a color. And then perception comes in to say that is a red color. This is a purple color. But the first thing is you see color. And then there is the perception that identifies what that color is. But it's the consciousness that lights up everything. It puts a light on what experience you have. When you eat something, there is a taste. Well, consciousness cognizes what that taste is. Then, bhikkhus, it occurred to me, when what exists does consciousness come to be? By what is consciousness conditioned? Then, bhikkhus, through careful attention, there took place in me a breakthrough by wisdom. When there are formations, consciousness comes to be. Consciousness has formations as its condition. So what are formations? Formations are the potentials, the seeds. There are three kinds of formations. They are body, speech, and minds. So bodily action, verbal action, and mental action. So formations are the little things you see on the matrix. They're the DNA of all the thoughts, all your actions that are coming to be. Now, from number 1 through number 5, you can't really experience those. They're potentials. It's just as though with this mallet and this bowl here, there is a potential of sound. Well, where's the sound? Well, I can't see the sound. Where is it? Oh, there's the sound. The sound was made through the contact of the wood with this bowl. So there is a potential there. And this is attempting to break up or to identify all the little pieces that are happening. When there's contact, before that, there is a stream of consciousness going. It's like if there's a contact, there's somebody at the door. It knocks at the door and says, "Hello, I'm here." And formations are these little guys. It's you, down deep, going, "What's that?" And this arises, and this process arises, and it hits the sense base, the vibration of the sense door, and this consciousness that is potential now explodes into being. And you, with the mentality and materiality, you have now the feeling, perception, and contact arises. It just explodes into awareness. So every time you hear, every time you see, the formations are going there. They are you answering the door. And when you answer the door, there's potentials of action in each one of those. Formations can go and they hear something and maybe they don't like it. Maybe they're in a bad mood. So they go to the door and they say, "I don't like you." And, some people like maple syrup. Some people, like Jerry over here, he hates maple syrup because his mother made him eat maple syrup all the time. So when he sees maple syrup, he doesn't like it. And when we see it, we like it, unless there's somebody here who doesn't like maple syrup. So you can see things in a different way. These are your formations. This is your DNA. And if you think about it in terms of computers, when you see a web page, you see pictures, you read text, and you have this feel, "Oh, wow, look at that, there's a beautiful beach here." Well, those pictures and everything else came through a cable, and they are electric bits and bytes. They're just little electrical impulses. And when they are interpreted by the computer, they burst into color, into text. And so these are the potentials. These are the formations that are operating in you. You have already answered the door by the time you hear the person at the door. This is another thing to think about. When you hear something and react to it, you've already heard it because your deep mind has already been stimulated. And so you're actually hearing things after the fact. And I think neuroscience is actually, I think there's a measurement that you don't actually, it doesn't come into your conscious awareness for just the tiniest moment of time, but it's already showing up on a brain monitor that you already are experiencing what's there. So you're always kind of behind the times. And one thing you can do in your meditation is, and it's really interesting, is if you're in a deeper like nothingness, sometimes you'll see a light, and if you look, just pay attention very carefully, you'll see a sound comes up. And if you see another movement, you might feel a feeling. So you're actually seeing, you're starting to see these potentials, that they're triggering things in your mind. I've done this, and I see this light, and then I hear a sound. It's like, whoa. So I'm seeing the stimulation of the brain before I actually hear the sound. But I mean, it's almost instantaneous, but it's still, there's definitely a lag. And so you can see all of these things, and you should start to look for these things in your meditation to understand more clearly that there is no you here. There is a bunch of processes. Then, bhikkhus, it occurred to me, when what exists do formations come to be? By what are formations conditioned? Then, bhikkhus, through careful attention, there took place in me a breakthrough by wisdom. When there is ignorance, volitional formations come to be. When there is ignorance, volitional formations have ignorance as their condition. Thus with ignorance as condition, formations come to be. With formations as condition, consciousness and the rest, such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. So what triggers all this? It's ignorance. It's not a thing. It is an understanding. It is an understanding, it is a wrong understanding that what you think is pleasant is not pleasant. And because of your ignorance, you're going to chase after it. And when you stop being ignorant, then you stop chasing after things. And the Four Noble Truths are the explanation of this. There is suffering. There is the cause of suffering, which is craving. And there is the cessation of suffering, which is the relief. And there's the Eightfold Path, and the path which we're on. But what you don't understand is that whenever a sense base is triggered, it has the potential for craving to arise, clinging, and all these unwholesome states of mind. Now, the feeling is not unwholesome by nature, it is simply feeling. But feeling is also suffering because it arises and it passes away. So everything is arising and passing away. There's nothing you can hold on to. And everything is conditioned by the next thing. So this is dependent origination. It all starts with ignorance. It all starts with thinking that everything is pleasant, everything is a self, being attached to views, being attached to your habitual tendencies. It's all based on the craving aspects of mind. Now, we're going to do a little repetition exercise to kind of remind ourselves what these links are and try to get them into our mind. So you've got your handout. So this handout is from the Mahatanha Sankaya Sutta. Maha means great, Tanha means craving, and Sankhaya is a discourse. The greater discourse on craving, on the destruction of craving. So you are the students, and I am the teacher here. So what I'm gonna say is I'm gonna read this statement, and then you're gonna read the bolded statement. So let's go and do this. So monks, with ignorance as condition,
formations come to be.
With formations as condition,
Consciousness comes to be.
with consciousness as condition,
Mentality, materiality comes to be.
with mentality, materiality as condition,
The sixfold base comes to be.
with the sixfold base as condition,
Contact comes to be.
with contact as condition,
Feeling comes to be.
with feeling as condition,
Craving comes to be.
with craving as condition,
Clinging comes to be.
with clinging as condition,
Habitual tendencies come to be.
with habitual tendencies as condition,
Birth comes to be.
with birth as condition,
Aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair come to be.
such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. Reverse order questionnaire on arising. With birth as condition, aging and death comes to be, so it was said. Now monks, do aging and death have birth as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Aging and death have birth as condition, Brother Sir. Thus we take it in this case. With birth as condition, aging and death comes to be.
With habitual tendencies as condition, birth comes to be, so it was said. Now monks, does birth have habitual tendencies as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Birth has habitual tendencies as condition, Brother Sir. Thus we take it in this case. With habitual tendencies as condition, birth comes to be.
With clinging as condition, habitual tendencies come to be, so it was said. Now monks, does habitual tendencies have clinging as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Habitual tendencies as clinging as condition, thus we take it in this case. With clinging as condition, habitual tendencies come to be.
With craving as condition, clinging comes to be, so it was said. Now monks, does clinging have craving as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Clinging as craving as condition, Brother Sir. Thus we take it in this case. With craving as condition, clinging comes to be.
With feeling as condition, craving comes to be, so it was said. Now monks, does craving have feeling as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Craving has feeling as condition, Brother Sir. Thus we take it in this case. Feeling as condition, craving comes to be.
With contact as condition, feeling comes to be, so it was said. Now monks, does feeling have contact as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Feeling has contact as condition, Brother Sir. Thus we take it in this case. With contact as condition, feeling comes to be.
With the sixfold base as condition, contact comes to be, so it was said. Now monks, does contact have the sixfold base as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Contact has the sixfold base as condition, Brother Sir. Thus we take it in this case. With the sixfold base as condition, contact comes to be.
With mentality, materiality as condition, the sixfold base comes to be, so it was said. Now monks, does the sixfold base have mentality, materiality as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
The sixfold base has mentality, materiality as condition, Brother Sir. Thus we take it in this case. With mentality, materiality as condition, the sixfold base comes to be.
With consciousness as condition, mentality, materiality come to be, so it was said. Now monks, does mentality, materiality have consciousness as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Mentality, materiality has consciousness as condition, Brother Sir. Thus we take in this case, consciousness as condition, mentality, materiality comes to be.
With formations as condition, consciousness comes to be, so it was said. Now, monks, does consciousness have formations as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Consciousness has formations as condition, venerable sir. Thus we take in this case, with formations as condition, consciousness comes to be.
With ignorance as condition, formations come to be, so it was said. Now, monks, do formations have ignorance as condition or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Formations as ignorance as condition, thus we take in this case, with ignorance as condition, formations come to be.
Recapitulation on arising. Good monks, so you say thus, and I also say thus. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. That is, with ignorance as condition,
Formations come to be.
with formations as condition,
Consciousness comes to be.
with consciousness as condition,
Mentality, materiality comes to be.
with mentality, materiality as condition,
Sixfold base comes to be.
with the sixfold base as condition,
Contact comes to be.
with contact as condition,
Feeling comes to be.
with feeling as condition,
Craving comes to be.
with craving as condition,
Clinging comes to be.
with clinging as condition,
Habitual tendencies come to be.
with habitual tendencies as condition,
Birth comes to be.
with birth as condition,
Aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, despair comes to be. Such is the origin of the whole mass of suffering.
but with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of,
Formations.
with the cessation of formation comes the cessation of,
Consciousness.
with the cessation of consciousness comes the cessation of,
Mentality, materiality.
and with the cessation of mentality and materiality comes the cessation of,
Sixfold base.
with the cessation of the sixfold base comes the cessation of,
Contact.
with the cessation of contact comes the cessation of,
Feeling.
with the cessation of feeling comes the cessation of,
Craving.
with the cessation of craving comes the cessation of,
Clinging.
with the cessation of clinging comes the cessation of,
Habitual tendencies.
with the cessation of habitual tendencies comes the cessation of,
Birth.
with the cessation of birth,
Aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair.
such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. With the cessation of birth comes the cessation of aging and death, so it was said. Now, monks, do aging and death cease with the cessation of birth or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Aging and death ceases with the cessation of birth and disorder. Thus we take in this case, with the cessation of birth, cessation of aging and death occurs.
With the cessation of habitual tendencies comes the cessation of birth, so it was said. Now, monks, does birth cease with the cessation of habitual tendencies or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Birth ceases with the cessation of habitual tendencies, venerable sir. Thus we take in this case, with the cessation of habitual tendencies, the cessation of birth occurs.
With the cessation of clinging comes the cessation of habitual tendencies, so it was said. Now, monks, do habitual tendencies cease with the cessation of clinging or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Habitual tendencies cease with the cessation of clinging and restored. Thus we take in this case, with the cessation of clinging, the cessation of habitual tendencies occurs.
With the cessation of craving comes the cessation of clinging, so it was said. Now, monks, does clinging cease with the cessation of craving or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Clinging ceases with the cessation of craving and restored. Thus we take in this case, with the cessation of craving, the cessation of clinging occurs.
With the cessation of feeling comes the cessation of craving, so it was said. Now, monks, does craving cease with the cessation of feeling or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Craving ceases with the cessation of feeling, then it will serve. Thus we take in this case, the cessation of feeling, the cessation of craving occurs.
With the cessation of contact comes the cessation of feeling, so it was said. Now, monks, does feeling cease with the cessation of contact or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Feeling ceases with the cessation of contact, then it will serve. Thus we take in this case, with the cessation of contact, the cessation of feeling occurs.
With the cessation of the sixfold base comes the cessation of contact, so it was said. Now, monks, does contact cease with the cessation of the sixfold base or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Contact ceases with the cessation of sixfold base, venerable sir. Thus we take in this case, with the cessation of sixfold base, the cessation of contact occurs.
With the cessation of mentality and materiality comes the cessation of the sixfold base, so it was said. Now, monks, does the sixfold base cease with the cessation of mentality and materiality or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
The sixfold base ceases with the cessation of mentality and materiality so serve. Thus we take in this case, with the cessation of mentality and materiality, the cessation of the sixfold base occurs.
With the cessation of consciousness comes the cessation of mentality and materiality, so it was said. Now, monks, does mentality and materiality cease with the cessation of consciousness or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Mentality and materiality ceases with the cessation of consciousness or serve. Thus we take in this case, with the cessation of consciousness, the cessation of mentality and materiality occurs.
With the cessation of formations comes the cessation of consciousness, so it was said. Now, monks, does consciousness cease with the cessation of formations or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Consciousness ceases with the cessation of formations, and it will serve. As we take in this case, the cessation of formations, the cessation of consciousness occurs.
With the cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of formations, so it was said. Now, monks, do formations cease with the cessation of ignorance or not? Or how do you take it in this case?
Formation ceases with the cessation of ignorance, and the serve we take in this case, with the cessation of ignorance, the cessation of formations occurs.
Good, monks, so you say thus, and I also say thus, when this does not exist, this does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases. That is, with the cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of
formations.
With the cessation of formations comes the cessation of
consciousness.
With the cessation of consciousness comes the cessation of
materiality.
With the cessation of mentality and materiality comes the cessation of
the sixfold base.
With the cessation of the sixfold base comes the cessation of
contact.
With the cessation of contact comes the cessation of feeling. With the cessation of feeling comes the cessation of
craving.
With the cessation of craving comes the cessation of
clinging.
With the cessation of clinging comes the cessation of
habitual tendencies.
With the cessation of habitual tendencies comes the cessation of
birth.
With the cessation of birth,
aging, death, sorrow, limitation, pain, grief, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of whole mental suffering.
So this Sutta 38 is the Maha Tanha Sankhya Sutta, the greater discourse on the destruction of craving. So how do you destroy craving? That's when you understand that it's ignorance that wants all these things. It's ignorance, it's the destruction of ignorance destroys tanha, or destroys craving. Now, your goal here on the retreat, and your goal in life, is not to destroy from ignorance, essentially, to feeling. That's who you are. You feel, you have contact, you have mentality and materiality, you have consciousness, you have formations. What we're trying to do is remove the craving links that follow after that. The arhat, the fully enlightened being, has no craving, clinging, habitual tendencies. Of course, he has no birth of mental action based on craving. His body does age, but he has no mental suffering. The mental suffering is gone. So he's eliminated all of these links. So this is kind of the arhat. There's no, see, what you're missing is these are the craving links. And so what we're trying, this is the fire, the tanha. So we're trying to put the fire out here. And then all we have left is the green, just the body, the feeling, the contact, without any mental disturbance whatsoever. And when you understand that things arise based on the thing before it, and you understand that every thought arises because of something, and every reaction arises because of something, you understand that you didn't have any control over it. You could not control. Can anybody control their mind here? Can anybody bring up pleasant feeling just on demand? No. Can anybody get rid of unpleasant feeling? No. We have no control over our minds. That's when you sit in the quiet mind. You're just watching things come up. You're not doing anything. Anybody has a meditation practice that says you control your mind. Well, who's controlling the mind? The craving force is controlling the mind. We're eliminating craving. We're letting everything be. So when you understand there is nobody in charge, you don't need to worry about it anymore. You just watch the mind, let it do whatever it wants to do, and you achieve this sense of relief. And you don't walk around judging or trying to control. This is all gone because you know you can't. There is no control. And based on this is the destruction of craving when you understand and see the links of dependent origination. And when you get to the point where you are in quiet mind and you get to this very quiet space, and that space just goes, and your mind stops, and you enter cessation, the first thing is, because this craving mind has stopped, relief comes. You've entered a space of no craving, and there's a lot of joy that comes out of that, and there's a lot of relief. Then what happens is the next process, the next 12 links that arise are untainted by any craving, and you see them exactly. They are pure. But then the next set, and you understand that the total impersonality of existence. But the next set, you start to delight in all of this. Now you're taking it personally, you're enjoying it, you go, wow, I had this great experience. Well, that's craving. But that's okay, we'll give it to you. When an arhat finally breaks through to full enlightenment, he'll have this experience and he'll have no joy, no delight, because that's just taking everything personally. He'll just go, oh, cool, okay, yeah, it's good. But, we're not arhats yet. So I hope that everybody here sees dependent origination at some point during the retreat. And I would say that at this point in the retreat, we should be sitting a little bit longer. Take what you sat yesterday and add another 15 or 30 minutes to it. So that by the end of the retreat, you're sitting as long as you can, up to 3 hours. You don't need to go to 3 hours now, but that would be a nice place to go. The longer you sit, the more you give time for the mind to settle. And it's kind of, I was using the example of a tuning fork. You hit it and it's going like this, and then it's just kind of barely moving at all, and there's still sound coming from it, and then it stops. And there's a cessation of all the sound. And that's the mind. You have no control over your mind. It's just gonna move around as much as it wants. If you try to control it, it'll move more. It's like you hit it. So stop trying to control, observe, and let it come to a stop. And then you'll see what's after that. And there endeth the lesson. So we went through this pretty fast. I don't want to go into huge amounts of detail because there's lots of videos and things you can watch to get the full implementation of dependent origination. But initially, are there any questions about this? Oh, okay. How about we'll start back there, Matt?
So basically, the point of the jhanas is to go to the 8th jhana so you can see these dependent links.
That's right.
And then you get wisdom, like, oh, this is where my suffering comes from. And
That's
after
right.
you get the 8th jhana, you get more and more wisdom until you're like, oh, you're enlightened. You just see everything all the time.
Yeah, you understand that it's an impersonal process and that there is no self there, and there's nothing to, there's nobody home, and there's no control, and there is this, you have this idea of self. You think that there's a self, but when you see all the links, you think, oh, there's no self. Does your car have a self? Well, it runs, it goes down the street, and it's, accelerates and does all that, but if you look inside, there's nobody there. If you pull the engine apart, there's nothing there. But we call it a car. Well, we are calling ourselves selves, but in fact, we're just like the car. We have all these little pieces. Anyway, yeah, you keep watching, you keep understanding, you keep gaining wisdom. Yes.
This really is like remarkable because I think it's like you were saying last night, how like it's this force always pulling us.
Yeah.
This really is. It's like, so the mind itself is like this cascading force that begins not at contact but all the way before ignorance, and by the time it actually gets to contact, like there's like almost nothing anyone can do about it.
There's nothing anybody can do. You can just sit back and let the contact in.
Yeah. So it's almost like all of our feelings and emotions that we think are individual to us are already like kind of been predetermined by this whole.
Yeah, it's like we're just seeing them come in, and there is a kind of a separation. The consciousness is immediate, and you see things arising.
Yeah.
But you were there before it.
Yeah. Right.
You didn't make it arise. Now you're just observing your own feelings, your own reactions. Like, well, I didn't do that. I just saw it come on. Yeah.
Does anyone that practice TWIM become an arhat?
Has anybody done it?
Like Bhante, was he one, or anyone?
Well,
here?
Bhante Vimaramsi, he traveled through the world and he said he never did find an arhat.
He's
There's
asking
no
if
us.
practicing TWIM, if there's been an arahat from practicing TWIM.
Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Oh, that's what you mean.
Not yet.
We're still, this retreat, we'll do it.
I'll be one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So hopefully there.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I'm interested in where volition fits into this framework, because like with the elimination of craving, what is left to cause someone to choose to act one way rather than another way? Like an arhat still acts. They have make choices. Where does volition?
So the arhat still has formations. Conscious. He doesn't have any ignorance, the avijja. So he still has formations arise. They're untainted by any kind of craving. They're pure. They're just deeds. If he needs to eat, if he knows he's hungry, he goes and he eats. But he doesn't think about, wow, I wonder if there's any cheesecake today. He doesn't have those kind of thoughts. He notices the feeling in his stomach, and it's empty. And he thinks, to keep the body going, I need to go get some food. There's actually pain. The arhat actually just sees feeling. He doesn't think, I'm hungry. He thinks, I'm in pain. And I know that the solution to that is food. So time for alms round.
So he's just in complete acceptance.
And he can be okay. He could go a couple days without food and be all right, because he would not be attached to that pain. But he's kind to his body, and it is a painful sensation, and he wants to keep his body in good health until the end of his life. And of course he would just, he's a very intelligent person. He knows exactly what to do, but he doesn't need extra things to entertain him. Let's share some merit. May suffering one be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, those knowledge of mighty power, share this merit ours. May they long protect the Buddhist